All right, so following your intuition, your gut, your instincts, then we get into the concepts of following the guidance of your higher self, your soul, spirit guides, essences of higher power, um, elements, and whatever circles you resonate with, how they define that and what resonates for you on a personal level. Those areas, that whole area of gut and instinct and intuition and higher power and higher self and soul, is in this world of duality, conflict, tension with our opportunity for awareness, our baggage of conditioned behaviors and thought process and belief systems that are sticky and project concepts of what is in front of us, what this means, based off of what is not actually necessarily present there. We make this meaning, we formulate our opinions, our even desires and decisions so often based off of this opportunity area of awareness that is primarily informed by historical sensitivities, relational pain points, and unmet needs, and various survival characteristics and traits. So there is this conflict and tension, this duality of, is this our high self instinct, godly, connected, harmonious, in resonance, present, consciously informed opinion, perspective, behavior, feeling, sensation, sensory information, and data? Or is this data that's heavily driven by historic stuff? Are we projecting? How much is this a projected experience that we're having? Relating this to relationships, a lot of us tap in to both simultaneously as we experience high levels of relational empathy, relational attunement, relational care, simply caring about the people that are around us, in front of us, in the world, that plays with the concept of both. The number one step that's coming through to offer as a support system when navigating how much of this is informed awareness and conscious presence, how much is this projected information and data from my very human, tangible, lived experiences of the past, or even intergenerational information, is very simple and not very easy. It does get easier with practice, as things do, which is to pause. pausing to be able to, instead of moving from a place of impulsivity, step back in a space of curiosity, reflection, and assessment. And as I say that, there's also what's wanting to come through is high functioning and very intelligently developed coping mechanisms and survival traits around this work and self-help and self-development starts to get itchy. There's this very common lean in or addiction to psychoanalyze how we feel, the experience we're having, the experience other people are having, especially when we're feeling some form of feeling wronged or betrayed, so that our survival part of our brain can formulate who's right and who's wrong, largely from a place of blame, because we tend to, in that space, feel better and relieved if we can point outward around us, point at our mom, our parent, our friend, our lover, our child, our dog. I'm looking at True right now. To be able to relieve ourselves of blame. How nice for the shadow element of our experience. How comfortably familiar, how painfully, sufferingly, comfortably familiar is it with that momentary relief of diverting awareness, attention, and ultimately accountability and responsibility from self, from our sense of identity, and be able to project a sense of blame externally. And that is not to say that other people should not be held accountable, that other people are not responsible for their actions, their experience, how they behave with us. And it's not to say that there aren't circumstances in our environment, relationally and environmentally, that cause impact upon us. However, there's this, again, dual nature of a dance to expand our minds, which is ultimate evolutionary characteristics from moving from surviving to thriving, being able to hold multiple conflicting experiences at one time, to hold multiple truths at one time, and to full circle, because there's so many points that are happening and moving through in this conversation, to full circle, bring it around to our instincts and our higher self and intuition and all these things. And notice how, like, our instincts and our intuition, those things are and can be, dependent upon what we're talking about specifically, also informed by the area of our past, our sensory experiences of pain, historical suffering points. And that moment of pause to actually simply breathe, which I use the formula of breath because it's something we always have regardless of where we are. However, there are multiple ways of the supportive element here, which is to come back and deeper into the body. Because we experience tension, and environmentally, which is, relationally, we're in conversation, we're in flow, something happens, something is said, they say something, we say something. That moment of pause and biting the tongue, sticking the foot in the mouth, to come back into the body alters our brain from a survival-based space where literally the part of our brain that formulates discerned decision-making is offline. We actually start to bring that online by doing basic things. When we feel anxious, when we feel a sense of stress, when we are very much hyper-focused and hyper-aware, hyper-attuned to other people, to the environment, to the dishes in the sink that need to get done, all these things in our human experience that we're navigating can easily pull us away from being in our bodies. And the concept of we can be in our bodies when we remember and when we have the actual lived experience of being safe within our bodies. There are certain experiences. I've had experiences in relationship and several different relational dynamics where it actually wasn't the environment conducive to the most responsive, articulate, conscious, decision-making, discerned areas of my brain literally could not function. And that's, again, here's an example of a duality of responsibility and blame working hand in hand. When I say things like that, holding, not even holding someone else accountable, I was actually in that articulation of what I said. I was in several relationships that part of my brain that I would need to be able to feel safe in my body and formulate a rest and digest experience in my nervous system, to be able to think clearly, to be responsive instead of reactive, to problem solve from a place of responsiveness instead of impulsivity. We were not accessible, and that's not the blame. That is knowing the truth of my experience and the impact that I had in certain relationships, which, if we get into the heart of blame, it's a really beautiful experience of growth when we're able to live this. The start is intellectual understanding of this, like you're receiving this information. If it resonates with you, you're here, you're navigating the resonance level for you of the information, how it pertains to you, how it can be supportive to you, or not. And the dance is, I chose those relationships. regardless of the whys and regardless of how much developmental awareness and consciousness I had, because also we're going to choose things that are not necessarily good for us and damaging for us, which also have damaging for our well-being, but also have positive meanings long-term and in hindsight that we can develop for them. But I also need to input the seed of being aware of the concept of spiritual bypassing when working with that frame and considering putting positive meaning on things. It's such, right, this experience of being human is such a dance between very opposing polarities of extremes. And then there's the whole spectrum, and it's all that sounds so mathematically linear, but then you take it and you start it out as a mathematical linear situation that you can visualize, or you can map out on a whiteboard, and I could be like, over here is this extreme, and over here is this extreme, and here's the line where there's all of this spectrum and information in between. However, then next level, you expand the entire map, that entire linear map, into a space of infinite depth. Infinite depth. So there's all of this range with infinite depth. Now it starts to become quite complex and dynamic and quite human and more honest and more real as the reality of the lived experience that we have as human beings in this world, which also is this ultimate mirror and reflection of the nature of that spectrum, the dynamicness, the complexity of it, the depth and the range. So within that regard, who is to blame? It's not a linear answer. If there was a linear answer, it would be everyone to some degree, because everyone's contributing. Relationship is the sum experience of parts or individual experiences, which is very dynamic and complex. And then you put it together, you get a relationship, you get individuals, you get parts that are contributing to the whole. Sometimes within those experiences and within those relationships, with which examples are most likely going to pop off for you in your historical relational experiences, past or present, of sometimes, when I say that sometimes there are relationships where you can sit back, be in your body. You might feel frustrated, irritated, upset, angry, sad. You might have a emotional and even somatic body response to the relationships that this other person's behavior and contributions were actually more consistently damaging than your own. However, even if there is the emotional response, the somatic response and experience involved in recalling that, there's also the sense of security of gnosis and being honest with ourselves. And I feel so strongly that actually sits side by side or in the same seat with a sense of responsibility, because regardless of how frequently or how inconsistent we were, or this other person, or these other people nourished and watered the plant of the relationship, we always participated and contributed, both in ways like, one, very simply put, we choose to relate. The only time that we can move that aside in a really simple way is with the area of blood family members or guardians, childhood and even adolescence, where we, that choice, it's a challenge with verbiage, right? Because it's like, that choice wasn't so much a choice because we relied on these people for survival. There are some teachers out there, some channelers out there, some coaches out there who talk about how we chose our blood family or our guardians as conscious beings before we inhabited our body and came into the experience we did, to set us up for the lifelong experience of what this identity means of being this person, and what our life path looks like, and what our lessons and our challenges, and the tensions and the harmony happens to be, and what we co-create in, historically speaking, in the entire lifelong experience of this bodied experience, this life. However, factually speaking, what I can say to that, because I'm not going to agree or disagree with that, but what I can say to that is giving a meaning to the blood family and guardian experience that we had. It's giving meaning. So regardless, now as adults, and even as, like, what's coming through is me as a teenager and my experience. It's like, I made tons of decisions every day, just like you, just like every human. And just like every human, a lot of those decisions were made with some awareness. A lot of those decisions were made from patterned habit, impulsivity, survival space, that part of my brain of responsiveness being shut down. And I also was very high functioning and became very high functioning in stressful experiences. However, my point with that is, even as a teenager, I had choices in how I related to family members. And obviously, here's where some leeway and empathy and forgiveness starts to come through, is the experience, especially for ourselves, when we start looking at accountability and responsibility. And we, maybe you're like me, where you acted like a bit of a jackass at certain points growing up, and you can feel a sense of guilt or even shame or insecurity or regret around what you contributed at certain points in time, maybe at certain phases or seasons of your life. All these things start to come through in terms of forgiveness and insight and more of a dynamic perspective, a broadening perspective, when we actually start to weave in that we all did the best we could with what we had. That's another complex notion. I'm going to move past that. If you'd like me to talk more on that, feel free to communicate that with me. But I'm going to move past that for the sake of this conversation, because we're getting hefty here and we're weaving a lot of threads into the conversation. And being able to tie it together in what wants to come through now is the element of co-creating, constantly co-creating. That means there's a constant responsibility for all parties involved. There's constant participating from every being around us. And that looks dynamic for every individual in terms of the resources they have, the past experiences they've had, the sensitivities that they've formulated, and have the needs, desires, communicative abilities, skills, again, resources or not that we and everyone has. So that moment of pause, which is like the number one biggest thing in terms of like a step one, a starting point, the initiation of relating to anything and anyone around us and also with ourselves, is pause. That's the starting point. What do we do within that pause? Anything to actually support coming back into our bodies. So there's the notice your feet on the ground. I mentioned breath. The breath is such a spectacular tool that so many teachers out there utilize, including myself when I got certified for teaching yoga and meditation and all of these modalities, for ultimately feeling incredibly safe within one's body and being able to expand holistically to be sensory have the experience of being sensory alive, all of our senses alive, and also growing in aliveness, because we ain't just got the senses that we're taught growing up that we have, which are constantly developing and activating and growing, as well as the ability more to be responsive. And so the breath is so wonderful because it impacts our lived experience holistically with this one thing. It impacts how safe we do feel. It's like the door open as like a welcome, or being shut on feeling safe or not within our body, and whether that's an opening or a closing. Regulating our nervous system, yada, 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 all of that. We're just going to brush right along that. just regulating our nervous system. So pause, that's the number one. Let's just like tie this up and say pause, breath, elongate the breath, be aware of the breath. And then of course, whenever I would sit with people in one-on-one sessions and doing one-on work with individuals or people, and women, worked for years with women only, particularly, and there's always this tool of, okay, what now? Because you actually have to have the lived experience. Say you're in the moment and you're like in a conversation and you start to feel stressed or overwhelmed and you pause and now you're focusing on your breath. Well, you can't just like stay there, right? In terms of having a responsive human dialogue and experience. Person's like, hello, are you there? Developing, so insert, this subtext, under pause. It's like, okay, breath. And then under there, you can also have the tool of developing a go-to sentence, and statement of like, could be anything from, I'm hearing what you're saying. I'd like to reflect on this more. I'm really happy to circle back around to this in an hour or tomorrow. Do you happen to be available? To come back to it, to reconnect at that time. It can be something like, I'm needing a moment to process this experience. I'm needing a moment to process this experience. I'd like to come back to this today at 4. Would you be open to that? Breathing allows that tool to actually be accessible. You see how if we are outside of our bodies and operating on impulse and operating within the realm of anxiety, past stuff, that things come out so differently. When sometimes we actually mean that thing. We mean those sentences, that sentence, and it just comes out in a sideways splatter of poo. Getting into the realm, in conclusion, the final piece to this is getting into the realm of that addiction, that high functioning coping mechanism area of, fixating on psychoanalyzing and being a perfectionist and whatever our ideas of perfection are, like what does it say in the self-help books and what is, what does it say in this therapist's book to do, and what is this spiritual teacher or this coach saying is the skillful thing. It's like, if we can also pair all of these, like I'm feeling my body relax as I'm saying this. It's like if we could pair all of this information of skillfulness with the ultimate skill of being light, being playful, allowing there to be a human experience in its dynamicness and complexity, which also means an opportunity to learn and grow, which we all have within every capacity, because infinite growth for infinite things and areas. If we can relax a little bit, because we also know that there are all these tools that we have, including, this is why we have things like practice, apology, both communicatively and also in action, as reparation tools to be able to repair and do better. And we, regardless of how great we get at walking with our experience of walking for years and years and years and decades, we still sometimes stub our toe, trip, fall, and what have you. So the lightness, bringing in some of the lightness, which, you know, is like married to the concept of like play and letting go and simplifying and being easy and being instead of doing. Doesn't that feel good? All right, that's the transmission that wants to move through and be channeled at this moment. And thank you for joining me and being here and connecting with me in this way. And I am sending Juju your way to hold you through this human experience and the dynamicness. And yeah, see you on the other side.